The Waltons, the iconic TV show of the 70s about a multi-generational family living in the same house during the Great Depression of the 1930s, is a show that has endeared itself to the hearts of many through the generations. One of the most iconic scenes seen on the majority of the episodes of the show's 9-year run is the family table scenes. Around the table, the busyness and activity of the world stopped and was replaced with busyness and activity of a family catching up on the day's events, sharing their joys and struggles of that day, trying to mend problems, share their dreams, rejoicing in each other's triumphs, and sharing in a meal that was prepared by loving hands. When the Waltons series premiered in September of 1972, many homes had lost their family table of the past decades. The table had been traded in for TV trays and a couch. The multi-generational families residing together had also mostly become a thing of the past. So these two aspects of the show alone brought not only a sense of nostalgia to the time period in which the show aired, but over the decades has acted as a point of reference to a society that has had little sense of such family unity as the show portrayed. There were 11 members of the Waltons family that would gather around that big old table for each meal. At the head of the table was Daddy, portrayed by Ralph Waite, and next to him, on either his left or his right, this position would vary depending on the season of the show, was Mama, played by Michael Learnard. Their 7 children to fill the benches alongside of the table, while the patriarch of the family, the wise and mischievous Grandpa, sat at the opposite end of the table from Daddy, played by the phenomenal Will Geer, and the cranky yet sweet Grandma, portrayed by Ellen Corby, sat next to Grandpa. Faced with realistic problems and situations, from financial hardships, lack of material needs at times, sickness, strife, and heartache, the viewing audience was able to see a family pulling together, putting their own needs and wants aside for the betterment of the others. Financial struggles were met as a united force. Sickness was faced by putting their trust in God. Strife was real, but always in the end worked out so that the relationships were left stronger than before. And though they all had their own wants and needs, they all looked after each other, putting themselves last and others first. And through this, each one came out in front. Through many interviews of the actors who played these parts, there was a common thread that these table scenes were really the least favorite scenes to do. Typically, all the scenes in the kitchen from any one episode would be shot in one day. This would save on large amounts of time in the resetting the kitchen area for the crew. If you have watched The Waltons, then you are familiar with how much each of these episodes is centered in the kitchen, a very large amount of it. Having so many kitchen scenes caused 2 things for the cast and crew. 1, the scenes were not shot in order, and 2, the days were long. With the way The Waltons was filmed, this also added to the long kitchen shoots. Having 11 people gathered around one table, all involved in the conversation, would require a lot of individual close-ups. So even if you didn't have a line or weren't a direct part of the conversation, you were still needed to be in your spot at the table for any time that the camera may pass you by, because of course you were there as a family, and that's what the viewers needed to see. One thing many of the cast had mentioned in these scenes is that you learn not to eat much, even if you were hungry. If you started the scene off eating, you would have to eat the same way whenever the camera was on you. This could become daunting over the course of the day and how long the scene may take to shoot. Many of the actors who played the children state that Michael Learnard was a pro at making it look as though she was engaged in the meal, but never actually took part in eating. Judy Norton states that Michael would push her food around with her utensil on her plate when the camera was on her, and even at times start to pick up her fork as if she were to take a bite, but then she would all of a sudden get involved in a conversation, putting the utensil back on the plate, never having it reach her mouth. Other cast members have said this used to drive Ralph Waite crazy. He had made it his personal mission to try to get her to eat, but it appeared based on the scenes from the episodes that Ralph failed. It's very difficult to find a scene where Michael actually is eating. The only time that I can say I recall her eating is when she is preparing food for the family as if to taste for flavor, but even those scenes are very limited and hard to find. Though these scenes made for long days for the cast and crew, I personally feel the enormity of the time spent at their family table is significant to the success of the Waltons and the connection that it made to all generations since. Now, I've had conflicting information, so I cannot quote this to be either fact or fiction. At one time, it was stated that the meals for the Waltons had come from Kentucky Fried Chicken on a norm, but it has since been said that Judy Norton states that she remembers that one of the doors that the family only used in 1 or 2 of the episodes, that was right next to the wood stove, actually had a kitchen in there where food was being prepared. So Maybe they did both. I don't know. Whatever, it's still interesting to consider the possibilities of where did the food come from. Obviously, Mama and Grandma were not in the kitchen making it. It did have to come from somewhere. The commissary is another option. Everybody does state, though, that though the food would be fresh in the beginning of the shooting of the scene, by the time the day had worn on, the food was very nasty. Again, one cast member remembers that if the scene had to be reshot, the food would be scraped into the bowls accordingly, and then you just re-scooped it back out. Judy Norton also states that she remembers that they had a break from the scene and they went to lunch. The plates would be covered up with a cloth, and then when they returned would simply be uncovered to pick up where the scene had left off prior to their break. Richard Thomas had stated that when they first started the Waltons series, they got to pick where they sat at the table. And he said that it didn't take long for him to realize the position that he picked was probably not a very good one. He sat next to Will Geer, who played Grandpa, whom he said was a scene-stealing magnet. And across from him sat Cammie Coulter, the youngest of the Waltons clan, and who was just adorable to look at. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Remembering the Waltons, and we will be back with another episode soon. If you like this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and feel free to share this on your social platforms so that others can learn about this great family series that is well worth seeing and a wonderful way to spend an evening with your family.